Feeling lost is not a malfunction of your life, it is an alarm system. It is the mind's rebellion against living on autopilot. You are not lost because you are broken. You are lost because what once made sense no longer does. The real danger is not feeling lost. The danger is numbing that feeling with distraction instead of interrogating it. A lost phase is the point in life when you are being forced, not asked, to reconsider who you are, what you serve, and what you tolerate. The question is not, how do I stop feeling lost? But what is this feeling trying to end in me? And what is it trying to begin? You are not lost because your compass failed. You are lost because you've been navigating with someone else's map. The architecture of your days is the skeleton that supports whatever identity, work, and purpose you will allow to grow. Audit that architecture the way an economist audits an economy, with honesty, numbers, and a willingness to change the institutions that fail the people who live inside them. Start with a ledger for 3 days, ideally a week. Keep a brutal time log, not impressions, not intentions, but records what you did, when you started, when you stopped, and how you felt afterward. This is not a diary of virtue, it's an inventory of where your attention and energy are expropriated. Look for leakages. Where does your time evaporate without producing dignity, competence, or joy? Those are the places where external demands, habit, or the default options of convenience have stolen parts of your life. Next, sort every activity into one of three piles: sustenance, growth, and rent. Sustenance are necessary maintenance tasks, sleep, food, basic hygiene, paying bills. DROWTH moves you toward agency, learning, deliberate practice, relationship repair, creative production. Rant is the part you hand over because someone or something expects it: Slack, social media scrolling, performative business, obligations you never negotiated. If you treat these piles like budget lines, you will see how the invisible tax of modern life compounds: more rent, less growth, and eventual scarcity of meaning. That imbalance is not your moral failing, it is the design of many workplaces and social systems that monetize attention and reward perpetual availability. Then perform an energy audit. Time alone does not tell the full story. 2 hours of exhausted, distracted work is not equal to 1 hour of focused, aligned labor. Map your circadian peaks and troughs. Put the most demanding identity, affirming work where your cognitive capital is highest. If your best thinking happens before noon, protect that block with the same ferocity you would protect a meeting with an investor. That protection is political. It signals to the world and to yourself what you prioritize. Design small rituals: a 2 minute breathing anchor, a 30-second desk reset, that mark the boundary between scrambled distraction and deliberate effort. Rituals are cheap institutions that change human behavior faster than abstract resolutions. Clean the entry points that let other people colonize your day. Notifications are the frontier posts of surrender. Turn off what you don't need. Create windows for communication and windows for creation. They cannot be the same thing. If your work demands responsiveness, negotiate the terms, specify hours for synchronous work and hours for heads down production. If your life is run by others' calendars, reclaim blocks you assign to yourself and treat them as non negotiable appointments. This is not arrogance, it is an act of structural necessity. People who refuse to schedule themselves become scheduled by default. Audit relationships as functional units of time. Ask which relationships pull you toward competence and which pull you toward consumption. Keep the ones that teach you how to make, repair, think, and endure. Distance, not always dramatic departure, sometimes simple re-weighting, is an economic decision about where you invest social capital. The architecture of your days should include margin hours without plan, minutes for reflection, space to change your mind. Margin is not laziness, it is the structural elasticity that allows for adaptation when your environment demands it. Without margin, you are brittle. With margin, you are capable. Replace big, paralyzing questions with micro experiments. If you feel lost, don't ask, what should I do with my life? Ask, What can I do next Tuesday from 8:10 that will give me information about whether a path is worth continuing? Run 30-day trials, not lifetime commitments. Measure outcomes that matter. Did I learn something? Did I produce something? Did I feel more like myself? The point is to make decisions iterative and empirical rather than mythical. Your days will then become labs where hypotheses about who you are and what you can be are tested and revised. Finally, institutionalize the small proofs. Success is social and psychological. It compounds when public and concrete. Publish a weekly short note about what you attempted. Show the work. Accountability is not moralism, it is architecture. It reshapes incentives and keeps momentum from evaporating. Celebrate the margins of competence, the consistent 5% improvements that aggregated make whole lives. An audit of your days is not a cosmetic exercise, it is systemic reconstruction. You will discover that many of the forces making you feel lost are external. A culture that prizes availability over craft, a workplace that measures presence over contribution, an attention economy that auctions off your focus. Naming those forces reduces shame. It lets you stop treating lostness as a private defect and start seeing it as a signal with a public cause and a resolvable structure. Rebuild deliberately, edit ruthlessly, arrange patiently, and measure honestly. When the architecture of your days honors your capacities, your confusion will stop being a fog and become a question with answers you can design and test. You don't feel lost because you lack capability. You feel lost because you keep assigning your worth to audiences that do not exist. Most people live as if someone is always watching, evaluating, ranking, and approving. They rehearse their posture, their updates, their progress, their timing, their decisions for a tribunal that never shows up with a verdict. This is the quiet exhaustion of modern life. We are busy performing for spectators we invented in our head. The tragedy is not the performance, it is the displacement of agency that follows it. Every time you optimize for perception, you abandon construction. You begin living in anticipation instead of direction. Invisible audiences are assembled from fragments, the imagined expectations of parents, colleagues, peers, former lovers, critics online, cultural myths about success and timing. They linger in the psyche like unpaid landlords. You consult them before you act, not consciously, but reflexively. They influence who you date, what you post, how you speak, whether you leave a job, when you rest, when you change paths. They are not real, but they govern you as if they were law. Liberation begins the second you treat this as structural, not personal. This is not your insecurity alone. It is the predictable result of living in a culture where reputation is a tradable currency and visibility is mistaken for value. To stop performing, you must refuse the social illusion that progress is validated by witnesses. The deepest work, identity work, craft work, rebuilding, forgiveness, discipline, is done in long stretches of obscurity, but obscurity terrifies the ego because obscurity denies applause. If the audience is gone, how do you know you're doing it right? You don't. And that is exactly how people grow. Progress is not socially confirmed until long after it is privately produced. The wrong model is be seen, then build. The right one is build, then be seen only if necessary. The temporary loneliness you feel when you stop performing is not punishment. It is detox from approval addiction. Reject the false productivity that exists only to be narrated. If you go to the gym and must broadcast it, the workout was not for your body, it was for the witnesses. If you work on a project and cannot sit with the silence until completion, the effort was not for mastery, it was for reputation. If you study only when it can be displayed, you are not learning, you are auditioning. Real work has no spectators. Real change demands secrecy not to hide shame, but to protect incubation. Premature exposure kills momentum. Once people see you mid construction, commentary begins, negotiation begins, self consciousness begins, and construction slows. Stopping the performance is not psychological alone, it is behavioral. Delete the stage doors, reduce posting, reduce explaining, reduce announcing your plans. Change the unit of validation from applause to execution. Did you do the thing you said you would do, regardless of who witnessed it? Shift your metrics from external noise to internal proofs. Did you gain skill? Did you reduce error? Did you act in alignment with what you claim to value? Build a private scoreboard. Make decisions that are legible only to your future self, not to bystanders. Replace "will this impress anyone" with "will this move the project forward?" Expect withdrawal pains. When you stop performing, you lose the micro dopamine that came from imagined approval. There will be a hollowness. Do not mistake that hollowness for evidence that you should return to the stage. It is simply the cavity where your new center of gravity is forming. You are shifting from living as an exhibit to living as an instrument. That interior sturdiness takes time. Boredom will hit, silence will feel heavy. Keep going anyway. That discomfort is proof you are transferring authority back to yourself. In the absence of an audience, you meet your actual self without costume. That encounter is initially disorienting because you can no longer outsource worth to perception. But what forms next is sovereignty, the ability to act without requiring witnesses. People who stop performing become unmanipulable. They cannot be guilt tripped, shamed, rushed, or dazzled by status metrics. They decide on first principles, not social temperature. They can walk away from rooms that don't fit because they no longer need the room to confer identity. What replaces performance is production. You stop curating an image and start constructing outcomes. That is the axis on which lives turn. From narration to generation, the world rewards the result, not the theater surrounding it. When you exit performance, your energy reallocates to what actually compounds skill, proof, depth, endurance. The invisible audience was costing you the very strength you needed to build something real. When you fire them, you regain enough bandwidth to become someone whose life does not need an audience to be justified. The disappearance of the crowd is not the end. It is the first condition for a life that is finally yours. Anxiety is often not a sign that something is wrong with you. It is a sign that something is undefined. The human mind can endure pain, pressure, workload, even uncertainty, but it cannot endure ambiguity for long. Vague anxiety is the psychological tax we pay for leaving problems in the fog. When you say, "I don't know what to do," the problem is not the absence of answers. The problem is the vagueness of the question. Clarity does not eliminate fear, it converts it into something you can wrestle. Start by exposing the ambiguity to interrogation. Instead of "I am lost," ask, "In which domain specifically am I misaligned?" Work, identity, relationship, competence, values, money, body, direction. Anxiety collapses when the domain shrinks. Make it smaller again. Is the issue that I don't know what I want, or I know what I want, but I don't know how to get it, or I know both, but I'm afraid of the cost? Already the fog has formed. Abstractions cannot be solved, only specifics can. Every vague fear hides a question you haven't forced yourself to articulate. What if I fail? Is still vague. A sharper question is fail at what exactly? What is the real loss? Money, time, reputation, identity, belonging. Most fear is not of failure itself, but of the story you imagine that failure implies. Once you name the feared cost precisely, you can price it. When a cost is priced, you can compare it to the cost of inaction, and inaction is never free. The same principle applies to direction. "I don't know my purpose" is an unanswerable torment. A tractable question is, what is something I can try in the next 30 days that will give me information about whether this path is worth continuing? Purpose is not discovered like a buried object, it is approximated through iterative questions and experiments. Replace identity statements with operational questions. Don't ask, "Who am I?" Ask, "What am I currently optimizing for?" Comfort, approval, growth, control, status, peace. That one question will tell you why your days feel the way they do. When anxiety comes from overload, don't ask, "How do I fix my life?" Ask, which single constraint, if resolved, would reduce the most friction? Money, health routine, sleep, boundaries, skill gap. Problems obey leverage. You don't need to fix everything. You need to fix the right choke point. When anxiety comes from timelines, refine the unit. Don't ask, will this work out? Ask, what is the next reversible step that reduces uncertainty without committing to the entire path? Reversibility is the antidote to paralysis. If the next step is reversible, you don't need certainty to take it. Specific questions also disrupt catastrophizing. My life might collapse is catastrophic fantasy. A precise question is, what are the actual scenarios that could occur? How probable is each? What is my counter move in each case? Risk is terrifying when it is mythical. It becomes manageable when it is mapped. Every military plan, every investment thesis, every medical protocol uses scenario questions, not because certainty is possible, but because precision weakens panic. Another dimension asks questions about agency, not drama. Instead of, why is this happening to me? Ask, what lever is still within my control in this situation? Even 1 inch of control can neutralize helplessness. When agency is named, energy returns. If you cannot change the situation, shift the question. If I can't change the circumstance, what interpretation or rule of engagement would make me stronger inside it? No circumstance has the right to define you without your participation. The discipline is to not stop at the first question. Most first questions are still too vague. Keep tightening the question until it becomes actionable. A good question ends in a verb: identify, remove, schedule, test, request, confront, decline, record, build, ship. A question that cannot produce a verb is still too blurry. This is not an intellectual hobby, it is a survival tactic. People do not break because their lives are hard. They break because their problems are shapeless. Anxiety is the signal that the mind wants precision. Each time you replace a vague fear with a specific question, you trade helplessness for a handle. Handles allow lifting. Once lifted, the thing that felt impossible becomes something that can be moved, even if only a little. And here is the quiet truth: the moment you sharpen a question, you have already begun solving the problem, because you have transferred the issue from the emotional circuit to the analytical one. Emotion without question spirals. Emotion under interrogation becomes data. Interrogate your fear until it names itself. Once it has a name, it has a limit. And once it has a limit, you can design what to do next. Your life is not primarily shaped by what you add, it is shaped by what you allow. You do not gain agency by layering hacks, routines, or motivational slogans over a life that is still leaking power. You gain agency by cutting supply to the forces that drain it. Withdrawal is not retreat, it is reclamation. You cannot build strength in the same conditions that made you weak. You cannot think clearly inside the architecture that taught you to doubt yourself. And you cannot design a future while still feeding the very systems, people, rhythms, and habits that benefit from you remaining uncertain, reactive, compliant, and tired. Start with the obvious but rarely confronted truth: anything that consistently produces self betrayal, numbness, resentment, or confusion is not neutral. It is anti agency. The cost is not the hour you lose, the cost is the identity you weaken. Agency dies one small concession at a time: the call you answer out of guilt, the obligation you never consented to, the digital habit you excuse because everyone does it, the environment you stay in because exiting requires a confrontation. These are not little things, these are the daily transfers of sovereignty. Withdrawal begins not with rage, but with diagnosis. Map the recurring situations in which you abandon your own judgment to avoid discomfort, relationships where you shrink, commitments you inherited rather than chose, work rhythms that flatten your attention, performative obligations that buy you nothing, conversations that leave you smaller than you entered. Then ask the highest leverage question: who or what benefits when I stay this way? The answer will make clear that much of your stuckness is not random, it is incentivized. Most people try to fix their lives by adding strength without first removing the conditions that dilute it. That is like trying to purify water while the pipe is still feeding in poison. You do not need more courage before you withdraw. Withdrawal is how courage accumulates. Every exit is a micro proof to your nervous system that you are not trapped. That is how agency is rebuilt, not through epiphany, but through repeated acts of refusal. Withdrawal will feel like loss at first because you are detaching from identities and agreements that once served as scaffolding. There will be silence where there used to be noise. There will be time where there used to be demands. There will be emptiness where there used to be distraction. Do not misinterpret that emptiness as failure. That space is where agency regrows. Power requires room. Your environment is not passive, it trains you. A room full of people who default to cynicism trains you to soften conviction. A job that rewards obedience trains you to mute initiative. A phone that interrupts you every 8 minutes trains you to abandon depth. Withdrawal is not a moral gesture. It is a deliberate destruction of the training ground that taught you to sabotage yourself. Do not wait for the perfect replacement before you remove what harms you. People cling to draining structures because they fear the vacuum between the old and the new. But that vacuum is not a danger, it is the incubator. Almost no transformation begins with addition, it almost always begins with subtraction. The order is not first find the better life, then leave the old. The order is leave the old so the better life has oxygen. Withdrawal can be graded. Not every exit needs to be catastrophic. You can reduce frequency before severance. You can decline without explanation. You can create delays, buffers, and friction so that default compliance is no longer effortless. You can move from daily contact to weekly contact, from instant response to scheduled response, from automatic yes to conditional yes. Every layer of friction you add is a layer of agency you reclaim. Expect resistance, not because withdrawal is wrong, but because your prior compliance was feeding someone else's convenience. What served others will not be surrendered quietly. You are not withdrawing from people, you are withdrawing from the version of yourself who negotiated against your own interests. The backlash is not a sign you are making a mistake, it is proof that you have stopped subsidizing a system with your acquiescence. The return on withdrawal is compounding. When you stop giving time to what weakens you, you do not merely gain hours, you gain self respect. When you stop explaining your decisions to people who don't bear their consequences, you regain psychological oxygen. When you no longer organize your life around not upsetting others, you re enter authorship. Agency is not built by force of will alone. It is built by structurally starving everything that profits from your powerlessness. Eventually, the nervous system rewires. You begin to experience the world not as something you must adapt to, but as something you can edit. You stop being the person events happen to and become the person who sets conditions. That is the quiet revolution. Withdrawal is not escape, it is reclamation of jurisdiction over your own life. Once you learn to remove what weakens you, you will no longer fear change. You will fear only the cost of staying in places where you shrink. People wait for a grand revelation before they act, as if clarity is a precondition for movement. That is a superstition. Clarity is not the starting line, it is a byproduct of motion. You do not think your way into knowing, you act your way into knowing. The mind wants a guarantee before it invests effort, but life never issues guarantees. The substitute for certainty is micro-proof, small, executed, observable actions that generate evidence you can use to update direction. Without micro-proof, you are negotiating with imagination. With micro-proof, you are negotiating with data. When you feel lost, it is tempting to demand a full blueprint, the 5 year plan, the exact identity, the final destination. But those demands are mechanisms of avoidance. They allow you to delay action until the universe hands you permission. Once I know for sure, then I will begin is a socially respectable way of saying, I want certainty without cost. Meanwhile, months pass, confidence decays, and ambiguity thickens. Micro proof breaks that paralysis by reducing the problem from existential to tactical. Instead of, should I change careers? The question becomes, can I run a 14-day test of a single skill adjacent to that career and gather one piece of evidence? The burden shifts from metaphysics to movement. Micro proof does three things that macro clarity cannot. First, it compresses the time horizon. You cannot solve for your entire future, but you can solve for the next repeatable unit. Second, it shifts your identity from thinker to executor. The nervous system trusts action more than intention. Once you produce proof, self doubt loses jurisdiction. Third, micro proof gives you something to measure. You can refine a path only when there is something built on it. The brain respects what it sees repeated. You do not convince yourself you are disciplined by thinking about discipline. You convince yourself by witnessing your own consistency. 10 days of writing teaches you more about whether you are a writer than 10 hours of thinking about writing. 30 cold emails teach you more about whether you can sell than 3 months of hesitation. 2 weeks of 6 a.m. training tell you more about your tolerance for early discipline than any plan on paper. Micro proof converts fantasy into feedback. People resist micro proof because it exposes reality. As long as you are waiting for clarity, your imagined future remains flawless. As soon as you test it, you risk learning that it is harder than you hoped. But that risk is the entire point. Evidence allows intelligent adjustment. The alternative is paralysis inside a hypothetical life that never materializes. The cost of not testing is always higher than the cost of learning something uncomfortable early. Micro proof also protects you from catastrophic commitment. When you design tiny, reversible experiments, you free yourself from the perfectionism that insists every move must be final. You are not marrying a path, you are sampling it. If the experiment yields promise, you extend it. If it fails, you refine or pivot. This is how engineers build, how scientists discover, how investors allocate. They do not wait for total clarity. They run controlled tests, learn, and iterate. Demanding macro clarity before moving is often ego protection. It allows you to preserve the story that you could if only you knew. Once you begin, that shield is gone. You either execute or you don't. But the ego's comfort is the enemy of progress. Micro proof erodes the ego gently. It gives you winnable steps so momentum accumulates before pride can sabotage it. Design your micro proof intentionally. Choose a narrow units of 15 minutes of daily deep work, one outreach per day, one completed page, one daily rejection, one new experiment weekly. Track it, review it. Let the numbers speak instead of your moods. Replace I think I'm improving with I have 19 days of evidence. Replace I believe I can do this with here are 6 shipped iterations. Agency compounds when proof compounds. Macro clarity arrives not as revelation but as accumulation, the accumulated pattern of many micro proofs aligning in one direction. One day you look back at a trail of executed tests and realize a shape has formed, not because you guessed correctly, but because you built your way into knowing. The people who appear certain did not start with a map, they started with motion. They trusted process over prophecy. Do not wait to feel sure. Become the kind of person who produces enough small proofs that certainty becomes irrelevant. You will not outrun doubt by thinking. You will bury it under evidence. Build first, refine second, understand later. The future is awarded to those who act before they feel ready and let clarity arrive on the back of proof. A lost phase is not an interruption, it is demolition. It is not a pause between identities, it is the active dismantling of one. You are not idle. You are being stripped of the assumptions, reflexes, dependencies, beliefs, alliances, and illusions that made the previous version of you workable. Identity does not update politely, it rewires through friction, rupture, disorientation, and subtraction. The discomfort you interpret as stagnation is the noise of old circuitry being torn out. People panic in transition because there is no visible scaffolding. They confuse the silence after a collapse with failure, when in fact it is the precondition for reconstruction. In a pause, nothing changes. In a rewiring, old capacities die so new ones can form. You are not waiting, You are being reconfigured into someone who cannot enter the old life without feeling misfitted. That misfit is the proof of progress, not the evidence of ruin. Most suffering in this stage comes from mislabeling it. If you call it a pause, you will wait for clarity. If you name it rewiring, you will actively collaborate with the process. Collaboration means you do not try to resurrect expired identities, expired ambitions, expired relationships, or expired self stories just to feel safe. You let them decompose. Identity is not durable because you hold on to it. It is durable because you allow the obsolete layers to die on schedule. Rewiring happens through deprivation, the absence of applause, the absence of familiar roles, the absence of certainty, the absence of momentum, the absence of belonging. Those absences create psychic vacuum, and vacuum is where definition is forced inward rather than outsourced. When your life stops mirroring you back to yourself, you must meet yourself without costume. That encounter is violent because you cannot hide behind function or reputation. You must confront what remains when the audience vanishes. This phase also recalibrates cost structures. The old version of you would trade autonomy for comfort, validation for peace, predictability for depth. Rewiring rewrites those exchange rates. You start refusing bargains you used to accept. That refusal is not stagnation, it is repricing. Once the brain internalizes a new price for dignity, alignment, and truth, it cannot return to discount living. Treating this as rewiring means you stop asking, when will this end? And start asking, what is this phase trying to terminate in me? Each recurring pain is a cable being cut, the need to be liked, the need to explain, the need to hurry, the need to be certain, the need to prove. These are not psychological quirks, they are identity pillars. When they collapse, you shake. Shaking is not malfunction, it is removal. During rewiring, you will temporarily feel like you have no identity. That emptiness is not a gap, it is a clearing. If you rush to fill it, you will install the same operating system you just outgrew. Let the emptiness stay long enough that new impulses have room to appear. This is how people pivot their lives, not by deciding a new identity, but by becoming someone who can perceive options their old identity could not detect. Because this is rewiring, the work is interior and invisible. Outcomes lag. You will not have trophies to show. You will have only changes in reflex you confront earlier. You negotiate boundaries cleaner. You silence yourself less. You abandon obligations faster. You withdraw from noise sooner. You choose truth over performance more often. These micro shifts are not cosmetic, they are structural. A single upgraded reflex can alter the trajectory of a decade. If you treat this period like a pause, you will try to resume once the discomfort fades. If you treat it like rewiring, you will refuse to resume anything that required you to amputate pieces of yourself to belong. The goal is not to return functional. The goal is to emerge incompatible with your previous level. Identity work is successful when going back becomes psychologically impossible. You are not being delayed, you are being refitted. A phase that feels like drift from the outside is brute engineering on the inside. Stop asking when you will get back on track. There is no track. There is only the self being rebuilt to generate a different trajectory altogether. Give this phase the dignity of its true name, not a pause, but the quiet violence by which a future self is welded. Stay inside it long enough for the weld to cool.